Why trust is being rewritten. Trust used to be slow. It was built through institutions, reputations, and promises enforced over time. Today, trust is changing shape, faster, colder, and encoded into systems that don't know your name. And once that shift began, there was no way to reverse it. In the modern world, trust decides everything. Who can move money, who can access platforms, who is believed, verified, or excluded. For centuries, this trust was outsourced to authorities meant to act as neutral guardians. But cracks formed as systems grew opaque, incentives misaligned, and confidence quietly eroded. The question wasn't whether trust was broken. It was whether it could be rebuilt at all. The reveal began when blockchain introduced a radical idea: trust without trust. Systems where outcomes could be verified independently, without relying on belief in an institution or individual. Transactions confirmed by consensus. Records secured by cryptography. Rules enforced by code. At first, this felt technical, but its implications were deeply human. People no longer needed to trust banks to hold value. They didn't need to trust platforms to keep records honest. They didn't even need to trust each other. They only needed to trust the system's execution. And slowly, that shift rewired expectations across the digital world. But rewriting trust came at a cost. When trust is embedded into systems, relationships change. Accountability moves from people to protocols. Mistakes become permanent. Flexibility disappears. The comfort of human judgment is replaced by the certainty of math. For some, this felt like liberation. For others, it felt like loss. As adoption grew, trust stopped being emotional and became mechanical. Verified didn't mean believed. It meant proven. Reputation became data. Promises became conditions. And the world began adjusting to a future where trust was no longer negotiated. It was executed. The deeper question lingered beneath it all. If trust can be automated, what happens to the social fabric built on belief, forgiveness, and discretion? Because rewriting trust doesn't just change systems. It changes how people relate to power, to risk, and to each other. As trust shifted from institutions to systems, the consequences began surfacing in unexpected ways. Processes once guided by relationships were replaced by verification. Access once granted through familiarity now depended on cryptographic proof. The human layer thinned, and with it, many of the assumptions society had relied on for centuries. The conflict emerged when people realized that trustless systems were not neutral observers. They enforced rules relentlessly, without empathy or context. A smart contract did not care why a payment was late. A protocol did not consider intent. It measured conditions, executed outcomes, and moved on. For those who benefited from consistency, this was fairness perfected. For those caught on the wrong side of execution, it felt unforgiving. Traditional trust systems fought back in subtle ways. Institutions emphasized human judgment, customer service, and discretion. They framed automation as cold and dangerous, warning that removing people from decision-making would strip systems of morality. Yet their arguments rang hollow to users who had experienced opaque fees, arbitrary restrictions, and silent denials for years. Mechanical trust, for all its rigidity, at least made the rules visible. At the same time, social trust began eroding in parallel. Deepfakes blurred reality. Bots simulated consensus. Digital identities fractured across platforms. In this chaos, cryptographic proof offered something rare: certainty. Not belief, not reputation. Proof. And in a world where appearances could no longer be trusted, proof became priceless. This shift redefined credibility. Authority no longer came from position, but from verification. Influence no longer depended on recognition, but on transparency. Even disagreement changed shape. Arguments were no longer settled by persuasion alone, but by what could be independently confirmed. Yet a deeper tension remained. Trustless systems worked best when rules were clear and outcomes measurable. Human life rarely fit that mold. Gray areas multiplied. Edge cases surfaced. People began asking whether removing trust entirely was a goal, or whether it was a step toward rebuilding trust on firmer ground. As systems absorbed more responsibility, society faced an uncomfortable truth. Trust had not disappeared. It had migrated. People no longer trusted institutions blindly. They trusted code, assumptions, and designers they would never meet. The faith hadn't vanished. It had simply changed its object. The question now wasn't whether trust should be rewritten. That had already happened. The question was what kind of trust humanity was willing to live with once belief gave way to proof. As trust became programmable, its limits became painfully clear. Systems could verify facts, but they could not understand meaning. They could confirm transactions, but they could not measure intent. And as more of life moved into trustless frameworks, the absence of human judgment began to surface in ways no one had fully anticipated. The conflict intensified when automated trust collided with human complexity. Disputes emerged that no smart contract could resolve cleanly. Context mattered. Circumstances changed. People made mistakes that code treated as violations rather than experiences. In these moments, the promise of perfect execution felt hollow. Trustless systems did exactly what they were designed to do, and that was a problem. Communities responded by layering new forms of trust on top of old ones. Decentralized governance attempted to reintroduce collective judgment. Reputation systems tried to quantify behavior over time. Arbitration protocols emerged, blending code with human decision-making. Each solution revealed the same truth. Trust could be minimized but never eliminated. Meanwhile, power quietly concentrated around those who defined the rules. The architects of protocols, the designers of incentives, the maintainers of core infrastructure became the new trust anchors. Their decisions shaped outcomes just as profoundly as institutions once did. Only now the authority was harder to see and harder to challenge. Trust had been rewritten, but not removed. Users felt the shift emotionally. Some found comfort in predictability, knowing exactly how systems would behave. Others felt exposed, navigating environments where a single error could not be forgiven. The safety once provided by discretion was gone, replaced by transparency without mercy. Participation demanded vigilance, literacy, and constant awareness. As these systems scaled, society began to confront a paradox. The more trustless a system became, the more trust it required at the edges. Trust in code audits, trust in governance processes, trust in the people who could update or intervene when things went wrong. The illusion of total trustlessness faded, replaced by a more complex reality. The build-up reached a critical moment when it became clear that rewriting trust was not about choosing between humans and machines. It was about redefining how they coexist. Trust was no longer something granted once and forgotten. It became dynamic, conditional, and continuously tested. The question grew sharper. If trust can be engineered, who engineers it responsibly? And how do people protect themselves in systems that never forget, never forgive, and never pause? The turning point arrived when society stopped asking whether trustless systems were better and started asking how they should be used. The novelty faded. The ideology softened. What remained was a clearer understanding of what had truly changed. The climax revealed a quiet truth. Trust was never eliminated. It was redistributed. Institutions no longer held it by default. Individuals no longer surrendered it automatically. Instead, trust became conditional, visible, and constantly renegotiated through systems that anyone could inspect. Power shifted away from promises and toward proof. In that moment, the extremes collapsed. Pure automation proved too rigid. Pure human discretion proved too fragile. The future formed in the space between them. Systems that executed rules reliably, but allowed humans to intervene deliberately. Protocols that minimized blind trust without pretending it could disappear entirely. A new equilibrium began to take shape. The resolution was not dramatic. It was structural. People learned to read systems the way they once read contracts. Literacy replaced faith. Awareness replaced assumption. Trust became something you verified continuously, not something you granted once. This demanded more effort, but it also offered more protection. What emerged was a world where trust was no longer invisible. It was designed, challenged, and maintained openly. Mistakes still happened. Failures still occurred. But they were no longer hidden behind opaque institutions or unquestioned authority. Responsibility became shared, and with it came a different kind of resilience. Rewriting trust did not make society colder. It made it more honest. It exposed the trade-offs that had always existed and forced people to engage with them directly. In doing so, it reshaped how power moved, how systems were built, and how individuals related to the structures around them. The age of blind trust is ending. In its place is something harder, but more durable. Trust that must be earned continuously, not assumed forever. Subscribe to join the journey. Why